Well, good morning, and I'm joined here today by Deputy Mayor Denzelman and Wong, Deputy Mayors Michael Thompson and Stephen Holliday, and of course by our City Manager, Chris Murray. And it's an occasion to say a few words on a very sad occasion for the city, which marks 1 year ago today when the city was shocked by a senseless act of violence. The pain of that awful day continues to be felt by everyone who loves this city. Up until that point, a year ago today, we had watched horrific incidents happen in many other places around the world, attacking innocent people. Things did happen in other cities around the world, but didn't happen in Toronto. There was a terrible loss of life in our city on that day. There were life-changing injuries, and there was a loss of innocence. But fortunately, there wasn't a loss of heart. Many lives, so many good people endured the unimaginable, and some continue to endure that today. In fact, many do, whether it's the families of those who we lost or whether it's those who suffered these life-altering injuries. I know that the pain of that day is the sharpest to those who were closest to it, and while a year has passed, that pain remains. I know that pain is especially felt by the families of the 10 innocent people lost in this tragedy and the 16 equally innocent people who were injured, some left with injuries that will last for the rest of their lives. Those are the people we will be thinking about today, all of us, those innocent lives cut short on what was a beautiful April day, and those other innocent lives forever changed, and of course the innocent lives of many others who were friends and family of those affected, their lives forever changed as well. Today, our city will gather in Mel Lastman Square in North York at 1:30 p.m., and it is part of a day of commemoration that will take place, including other events at 6 o'clock tonight up at near Yonge and Finch. And it will be done to honor the memory of those who were taken from us by this cowardly and deliberate attack. Beautis Renuka Amarasinga, Andrea Braddon, Geraldine Brady, Sohee Chung, Anne-Marie D'Amico, Mary Elizabeth Betty Forsyth, Chul Min Eddie Kang, Ji-Hun Kim, Munir Abdo Habib Najjar, Dorothy Sewell. We will never forget those names. We will not forget them or their families and friends who really did collectively embrace on that day 1 year ago and in the days since. I will not forget going to many of the visitations and funerals or visiting others in the hospital. Trying to determine just what to say was evidence itself of how scarring this tragedy really was. Joining families and friends in grieving and ensuring on behalf of all Torontonians that they knew our hearts were broken, our collective hearts were broken too, and making sure they knew that they had our complete support. And extraordinarily, but perhaps not surprisingly, hundreds of Torontonians also attended those visitations and funerals, strangers who wanted to help comfort, to help with the healing. This unfathomable loss of life left our city in mourning. We are a strong city. We have endured sadness before, but this was a tragedy the likes of which we've never seen before. As mayor, I want to acknowledge the first responders who answered the call that day. Toronto Police, Toronto Fire, Toronto Paramedic Services, TTC Special Constables all rushed towards the danger that day. They rushed towards the danger and did what they do best. Our hospital personnel were in place, ready to receive the dying and the injured. They're heroes every day, but on that day, they were absolutely heroes. All of those professionals were there in our city's hour of need, courageously, completely, compassionately, and for that, we will always be grateful. Many frontline services from the 905 also rushed to help that day, and for that, we are also thankful. And of course, there were many ordinary citizen first responders, if I can call them that, who did what Torontonians do when tragedy strikes. They help out in any way that they can. They came forward selflessly and helped in that moment that tragedy struck. And in many cases, they are still suffering some of the after effects, as are the professional first responders from the experiences they endured on that day. But we're forever grateful to them for responding as Torontonians would to something that happened a year ago today. We'll be holding an event later this spring to recognize all of those first responders who were on Yonge Street that day along with those who responded to the Danforth attack months later, because that too was an event that had a searing effect on the city, and where first responders of all kinds, the professionals and the ordinary citizens, responded in a way that was courageous and very much deserving of tributes from us. These were two events that changed this city forever. Two events hopefully never to be repeated. I know the toll that tragedy can take on those who are there at the time or in the immediate aftermath. Today, on this sad day, I want to say, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of all of the members of Toronto City Council and our professional public service, I want to say to our first responders and to the courageous citizen responders, to the city staff, to everybody who stepped forward to help, that we will always support you, because we know that, those activities on that day, the way in which you stepped forward, had a traumatic impact on some of you. And we'll always be there to make sure that you're okay. We owe it to you to be there for you just as you were there for us on that day and every day. The Yonge Street tragedy affected all of us, our city, but also how we live as a city. We are a city of people who respect one another. We embrace and empower all genders, all races, all religions. That is our greatest strength. And that's what we saw in response to this attack. We saw people from all walks of life running to the rescue of those in need and offering to help in the aftermath. We saw people of all faiths gather to mourn and to provide comfort to those who needed it so very badly, and many of whom continue to need it and who continue to receive support, as I know we will see today. We saw our city united against evil and dedicated to healing and to love. I saw a calm resolve in the faces of so many in the days and the weeks that followed. Indeed, in the difficult, sad, and deeply troubling moments right after this tragedy happened, I told the media that this did not represent who we are or how we live, because that was then, and it remains the truth today. We proved that in the days and months after, as the city itself began a healing process initiated by people who love the city, people in the local community, people who treasure our way of life. As we mark 1 year since the Yonge Street tragedy and proceed with a process to find the proper way to permanently memorialize the victims, I hope we will rededicate ourselves to the Toronto that the world sees. It's not perfect, but it is something that continues to represent a beacon of hope for many people from around the world. Though the healing process goes on, we began to heal fast, and we will be stronger because we have worked hard to make sure that love and acceptance remain at the center of our city's very being, not the polarization and division that we see in so many other places. Bien que le processus de guérison se poursuit, nous nous sommes rétablis rapidement. Nous sommes plus forts parce que nous avons travaillé dur pour nous assurer que l'amour et l'acceptation demeurent au centre de notre ville, et non la sectorisation ou la division que nous voyons tant que nos nombreux endroits dans le monde. In essence, that is what makes us a beacon of hope for people here and around the world. The embrace we offer to each other every single day, not just on days of tragedy or celebration. I hope that in that Toronto way we will see that again today, that we will continue to gather each year, yes, to honor the victims of the Yonge Street tragedy most particularly, but also to remind ourselves of the strength and of the heart of our city that we must always keep as the envy of the world. I'm happy to answer your questions if you have some today.
Mayor Tory, has your thoughts changed on how the Transform Yonge plan should play out, after this tragedy happened?
Well, I think that I said earlier on this morning on CBC Radio, there never has been a debate about the fact that Yonge Street will be transformed. There's been a debate about exactly how that will take place. But the notion that we are going to transform a street that was put in place in its present form really upwards of 50 years ago is something that will happen. It will take account of the fact we now have a community there in which thousands of people live and go about their business every day, which was not the case 50 years ago. And so there will continue to, I'm sure, be some discussion about how it happens, but the notion that we're going to make a transformation there is something that will happen, and I'm sure it'll happen in the next few years as contemplated.
Mayor Tory, similar incidents have happened elsewhere. The local politicians and the law officials have seemed to make it a priority that they explain why to the public as soon as possible. Is that a priority for Toronto?
Sorry, I did misunderstand the question.
Why these incidents have happened. When you think of Yonge Street, when you think of what happened on Danforth, the public still doesn't have a clear answer in either case of why it happened.
Well, I think one thing I've come to understand is that while the police are investigating something and while judicial proceedings are underway, it's very difficult for the police and justice system officials to give a complete explanation of what happened, because what you don't want to do is either compromise a police investigation or in any way jeopardize legal proceedings that are happening in the criminal justice system. And so it is frustrating, because I know that people want to know more about what happened a year ago today, as do I. And I don't know anything that the public doesn't know about what happened in the context of matters that are presently before the courts. But I'm sure at the appropriate time, when the justice system has completed its work, we will know much more. And in the case of the Danforth, it's slightly different because we don't have pending legal proceedings. And it is my hope there has been a lot more revealed this past year about that than people knew before. And I hope that people find that when I say comforting in the sense that they know more so that they can know what did happen, and just as importantly sometimes what did not happen. I well remember sitting in the command center in North York above the bank on Yonge Street in the immediate aftermath of the incident that happened a year ago, the tragedy, and hearing at that time all kinds of questions being asked and answered in a very professional way by our first responders because we didn't know. And that was a very difficult and challenging situation for them, which was handled incredibly professionally. But I think the public today sit and still don't know the answers to some of those questions, but I think it will have to await the completion of the judicial proceedings.
Do you know how to prevent similar incidents? Part of answering the question why is to prevent future incidents like this. Are you confident that law officials have done everything they can to try and prevent this kind of an incident if possible?
Yes, I think the people of Toronto certainly spoke to me very clearly in the aftermath of the Yonge Street tragedy to say that on the one hand they wanted to make sure that measures were taken to keep the city safe, but on the other hand they did not want the city turned into some sort of security nightmare. They very much valued the way of life we had here, which respected and reflected the fact that we were one of the safest cities in the world. And so there have been a number of changes made since the events of a year ago today that hopefully are subtle but effective. People do notice them and they do comment on them, but I think that the police and the city staff and others have done a very good job at achieving that balance that people expect between, on the one hand, making sure obviously that people are kept safe, and on the other hand, making sure that we don't fundamentally change the nature of the city. And I think that that's been done quite well, and there are obviously more things that we're looking at even around this building and places like that that are, in some respects, in response to events that have happened in the city that, as the police chief would say, it wasn't a matter of if they were going to happen, it was a matter of when, just because we are a large global city. While you hope these things never happen again or that they never happen to begin with, you have to expect sometimes they're going to happen as they did.
On Metro Morning, we actually brought one of those civilian first responders back to the scene, and she noticed that some of the big concrete planters that had been there when she was helping people were no longer there. Are those the type of things that the city should be speeding up to get some of those, Vision Zero style safety features back in areas like that?
Yes, and I don't know the particulars of why those planters are not there, but I'll look into that, because in the end, what you certainly don't want to see is less protective measures, both from the standpoint of the safety of pedestrians and cyclists and others, but also from the standpoint of safety as against the kind of thing we saw a year ago. And so the idea is to look for ways in which we can enhance the safety and do more to protect people, which is something that I know the officials and the police are continuing to work at today, and it is all part of, in the case of that particular stretch of Yonge Street, plans going forward that will lead to some alterations after 50 years of that street. Thank you very much, and we'll see you later today, I hope, at some of the ceremonies that are happening in North York.